Welcome everyone to the School of Performance and Cultural Industries and to this very auspicious occasion, the inaugural professorial lecture by George Rodosthenous, entitled, as you can see, Adaptation as Directorial Process, Contemporary Approaches to the Greek Classics and to Musical Theatre. My name's Jonathan Pitches, and I'm lucky enough to be the head of this fantastic school. For those of you who like to spot an inaugural, you inaugural spotters, you'll have already clocked that this is the last of 3 very special lectures by recently promoted colleagues in the school, covering the broad range of our activities, from failure and the cultural industries, Professor Yankovic, through materiality and scenography, Professor McKinney, and now to theatre directing, Professor Rodosthenous. First, I'd like to extend my congratulations to you, George, and to assert how important your work is in the school, as you will see from this lecture. At my request, a number of colleagues have offered brief observations regarding George's presence in the school, and I thought I'd offer these to offer a wider context and resonance to the words you're about to hear from George himself. You might want to guess who they're from, but I will not tell you. George is a force of nature, a fount of wisdom, and not just about theatre, whose office door colleagues regularly tap on to be warmly beckoned in while a telephone conversation is being conducted in Greek. George finishes the call and then turns his attention to you. In elegant English, he addresses your quandary, asking perceptive questions that help you solve the matter yourself. You come away with renewed energy. Since beginning at PCI, I've been struck by colleagues' generosity and commitment to collaboration, but George's support and consideration stands out and is, in many measurable ways, a key part of why I'm able to continue to work at the University of Leeds. George warmly welcomed me to the school as one of the first people I met before I started. Our in-person tour quickly turned into an inspiring discussion about our shared research and performance interests in musical theatre. My initial impression of him as a colleague of passion and care has only been affirmed as I've talked with him on modules and he's offered me his advice as school advisor. This one's a bit easier. 20 years of appreciation, there can't be many of those. There were lots of colleagues I valued, leaned on, sometimes depended on when I was at PCI, but George was always my go-to friend and support. Always the one I wanted to tell things to first, in the sure knowledge they would never be leaked. Always the one whose office I flooded in times of crisis and often left it smiling. We had lots of adventures too, navigating Bretton Hall anarchy with our own brand of it, riding carousels at the German Christmas market, hundreds of performances attended, dozens made together, with our own shortcuts and codes and in-jokes, such a comfortable but stimulating collaboration. Another colleague, you could remind people of his starring role in the nativity play we did at Bretton one Christmas. I was trying to think of what the starring role is in the nativity. Is it baby Jesus? Is it Joseph? Is it Mary? I don't know. You could also remind colleagues of when he used his military training to put students through their paces when rehearsing as soldiers, as one of his famous Greek tragedies in Adaptation. He has an amazing ability to stay in touch with PCI alumni, supporting their careers, watching their performances up and down the country too. Another, I remember his work on a BA musical theatre degree with Arthur. They supervised the Devise piece, I think, in 2002. Huddersfield Town, the musical. It made quite a stir and local media picked it up. Very catchy tunes that my children still sing 2 decades on. Regular collaborations with design students help to develop a distinctive, spectacular approach to lighting his dramaturgical spaces. Obviously, in particular, the reimagined contemporary versions of Greek classics. Always with students in mind, giving up hours to assist them to prepare for postgraduate acting courses and auditions. And now just a little taster of where we're about to go. Not my words. His brief style, usually spectacular settings that could be transformed in some way, often through light. A bath, swimming pool, yes, with water, a boxing ring transformed to a nightclub stage, tables that could stood upon, a car, a caravan, a boat. I'm hoping we'll hear more about these directorial sleights of hand in George's lecture, secure in the knowledge that his contributions, warmth and support are deeply felt and appreciated across this school. Please welcome Professor George Rodosthenous.
Thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Jonathan, for a wonderful, extremely moving introduction. We are here to celebrate 26 years at the University of Leeds and my promotion to Professor of Theatre Directing. After my BMAS, Bachelor of Music at Cardiff University, and my Masters in Music for Film, TV and Theatre at the University of Bristol, I received, at a very young age, the Stanley Burton Scholarship from Professor Julian Rushton at the School of Music to study for a PhD in music composition at the University of Leeds under Professor Philip Wilby. Halfway through my studies, I focused my energies on music theatre and composed and directed the trilogy Aggression, Schizophrenia, Sensitivity for 3 solo performers, piano and percussion, which toured from Leeds to Huddersfield, from Edinburgh to Cyprus. It was the final part of my PhD submission. At the same time, I composed music and directed the first Greek tragedy, Agamemnon, in the version by Stephen Berkoff, at the Raven Theatre, which is just opposite here and is now called the Pyramid. In the rehearsal room, I view the work of the director very much associated with the work of a conductor, conducting energies, actions, and particular moments of connection. Since then, I have directed 12 Greek tragedies, which were performed in Leeds, Athens, and Cyprus. I have also edited 2 volumes capturing my work and thinking in this area, contemporary adaptations of Greek tragedy, and the co-edited volume with Angeliki Boulou called Greek Tragedy and the Digital. I have been inspired by the work of Nikos Haralambous, Varnavas Kyriazis, and later on Katie Mitchell, Callisto Bieto, Emma Rice, and Alan Lydiard. Today, I would like to offer you an insight to my work in the rehearsal room and how adaptation can be a conscious directorial process. I would like to explore some of the concepts I have been using, such as musicalization, improvisation, and verbatim theatre. These processes have a direct synergy with my pedagogic work and pedagogic research. Some of the work happened within the pedagogic research framework, especially here in my very, very close to my heart stage at Leeds, and was shared with the community via public performances, seminars and workshops, whether that's Athens, New York, or Norway. Through faculty collaborations and workshops, these were attended by more than 1,000 pupils from students all over Yorkshire. There is a trigger warning about the lecture today, and it's about mentions of death, burial, and also suicide. If we start with Peter Bunish talking about adaptation, he talks about adaptation and says that from a continental theatre perspective, however, it has become utterly unimaginable that one would not break free from the authority of the text, not rethink the play afresh with every new reading, and not make a performance of the text with each new production. I think that's very daring and a very much contemporary view of adaptation. However, we have come into a lot of conversations and debates with people who feel that perhaps this is not being faithful to the text, and the fact that their so traditional approach to the work does not allow for this work to take place. However, Avra Sidiropoulou, on the same subject, she says that if we welcome the idea that any interpreted act is actually an attempt to generate a singular reading of a text by remodeling its original energies into a new work of art, then we can begin to understand why notions of fidelity and respect, which have infiltrated the field of adaptation studies, could be and should be replaced by more liberating terms, such as reimagining and reinventing. So these are the terms that I will be using for today's lecture in Adapting Greek Tragedy, about how we reimagined and we reinvented Greek tragedy and musical theatre for a new audience. This is the second reimagining of my work. It was Alcestis at the Breton campus in 2005. Admetus, the king, was reimagined as a rock star, and his wife Alcestis as a fashion model. Within this world, a very personal tragedy took place. Admetus had offended the gods and had to die. His wife offered her own life to save her husband. This moment of offering part of yourself for another family member felt very real at the time and extremely poignant in my decision to stage this work. We're going to talk very much about the transformative mise-en-scène, how the set is transformed and performs with the performers. So we can see this fantastic design by our design students very quickly is transformed into Alcestis' deathbed. So what we've got is her colleagues coming to pay respects to Alcestis, who gave her life for her husband. Fortunately, later on, God Heracles brings her back from the dead, with the only rule that she's not allowed to talk for a specific amount of time. Obviously, this work has later been developed into operas and further works, but Alcestis was the first work I created at Breton, at the School of Performance and Cultural Industries, and it really captures and encapsulates a lot of the work I've been doing since. In my introduction in the book Contemporary Adaptations of Greek Tragedy, I set out 7 principles for adapting the classical work. These are going to be translation, relocation, exploring the former religious elements of the chorus, domesticating the action, confronting the darker elements of human and social experience, scenography, and new feminist readings of the work. Translation is a key fundamental aspect of the work. For Hardwick, it's about transmission, transgression, and transformation. With the work that I did with the students were responsible for the translation and the adaptation, and they used all of their skills to create this new world, which really captures the new context that we'd like to set the work in. It's very often that the audiences come in with a lot of expectations, and there is sometimes the inevitable disappointment from those expectations, and I'm going to talk about encounters with those very, very soon. The second one is about relocating the action in a localized setting. A lot of the ways that we work on these works is that we relocate the action in the UK in a very familiar environment, whether that's Leeds or whether it's just outside Leeds or somewhere that we can really instantly recognize. And by doing that, we understand and we capture the tragedies and compromise and diachronic impact. Thirdly, it's about exploring the formal and religious elements of the chorus. Everybody is really familiar about the chorus and working together as an ensemble. The way I view the chorus is a bit more controversial than that. I see the chorus as individual voices, as individual human beings, that they all have their own journey, and we explore that in a different way. So in that way, we have different nuance and a different approach to the Greek chorus. Fourthly, I propose that we are domesticating the action. The relationship of parent and child, brotherly love, incestuous undertones, all of those together with a strong desire to give a voice to the secondary characters are part of my work. So in that way we have, again, additional interest in having a richer world that is inhabited on stage. We have a confrontation with the darker elements of human and social experience. If we think of the work Bacchae, and we're going to talk about that, it's about the extremities of terrorism, but also we think of the Persians, it's about a very much strong political statement about war and its impact on societies around us. Scenography is crucial in my work and everything I do. I strongly believe that the first starting point is scenography, the world that needs to be inhabited, that needs to be created, and that needs to be transformed throughout this work. So together with the text, scenography develops together with the performers to define, but also to sustain the narrative. Finally, it's about giving a new reading and a new feminist reading to the texts. Katie Mitchell, one of our finest British directors, has been really giving us fantastic adaptations of Greek tragedy. Some of the press has not been extremely positive for that work, and the Queen of British Theatre is currently in exile. She works mostly in Germany because her work is not understood and is not fully embraced in UK. So these fantastic feminist readings have been an inspiration for me and have been infiltrated in my own work. In preparation for this keynote, this inaugural lecture, I've been thinking very much about musicality and the transformative mise-en-scène, and I have been compiling a manifesto of how we can really teach theatre directing as composition at university level. So what I did, I established a 10-part structure of how we can really allow musicality and the mise-en-scène to be the two key main axes in the way that we approach directing. Firstly, it's crucial to be able to articulate the vision. A composer of a new piece of music is required to provide a program note for that composition. In the same way, a director should be able to articulate the vision before, during, and after the process. And this articulation should be clear and credible, and should run through all of the aspects of the production, whether it's scenography, movement, music, and marketing. Secondly, it's about conducting the rehearsal. Not similar to a conductor, the director should run the rehearsal room with structure, energy, inclusivity, and passion. It's really useful to allow our performers to make mistakes, because mistakes, or us accidents, can always be used in everything that we do later on. But by using music at the beginning, during, and after the rehearsals, a sense of playfulness is achieved, and that raises the energy and revitalizes all of the creatives in that room. A director needs to be able to collaborate with all creatives, stage managers, producers that are available for this process to take place. They're expected to really set the tone for the dynamics and pace in the rehearsal room, but also the whole process. And if we think of Eugenio Barba, I spent 2 weeks in Poland working with him at ISTA, the International Summer School for Theatre Anthropology, and that has changed the way I approach my directorial practice. So for Eugenio Barba, he does not generate the material, but his work is about directing the energy, the movement, the actions, and the connections of that material. So if, for example, when he was working on Andersen Dream, he would ask his performers to go away for a month and create 1 hour solo performance of one fairy tale. Then he would watch 9 hours of material, and out of those 9 hours, he would compile them into 90 minutes of interlocking, interweaving narratives to create the work Andersen Dream. So he's the director of that work, but not the creator, generator of the original material. This has been a process I have been using throughout my practice since I have met Eugenio Barba, and it's extremely liberating for the performers, for the creatives, because it gives them a say in the work, it gives them a moment where they can feel their own identities expressed, and it gives them the opportunity to really invest in the process. Coming back to transformative mise-en-scène, Alexander Dangerovitz talks about Robert Lepage, transformative mise-en-scène. So this is a new way of thinking of scenography, of allowing a very playful environment with all of the creatives in the rehearsal room, and being able to apply also musical strategies to transform the scenography live with the performers in order to have an organic mise-en-scène. We could think about variation and repetition, development and renewal, but also sustainability and effective use of a prop, as suggested by Jutta Hagen, to unveil a plethora of opportunities. Music and sound are also extremely vital in the way that we approach our directorial practice. For David Rosner, music can provide an independent auditory semiotics, and that is really a moment where we can allow the process to gel together. We can have musicalization or the application of musical strategies in our rehearsal to be part of the devising process, or as an organization principle, or it can affect the way that the audience receives and perceives the work. So we could use theme and variation, the sonata form, exposition, development, recapitulation, but also another range of musical strategies to achieve thematic unity. Directing and designing the space, the collaboration with the designer is crucial in unlocking the proximity of the performer with the audience, and that allows for a fully embodied experience. So the designer and the director collaborate together in order to achieve the maximum from that space. And together they can compose the stage on this, or they can compose the journey on the empty stage and explore all possibilities. There are also many ways that we can unlock the text using musicality. So we can hear the nuances of the spoken text, the hidden utterances and micro delays in vocal delivery, but also the explosions of sound. I treat sound as a musical score, as a partiture, with sudden changes, pauses, repetitions, and dynamics. And that is it gives us a deeper understanding of the vocal race and an active analysis to create an embodied and physicalized response to the text, which has musicality, range, and variety. It's been fascinating to be using the work of Mike Alfreds with the 8 efforts, but also actioning the text adding a transitive verb in every single line that the performer utters, and that gives it a fresh and a much more general and a much more focused approach to that line. It also makes it a connection point with the other performers. So we're thinking about full vocal range, pace, and unlocking the musicality of the text. Scene changes. Scene changes has been a fascination of mine, and I treat scene changes as part of the entire narrative, as not something different. So within scene changes, we can have additional narrative development or character development or context for the audience, but also there should be an organic part to the action and change the mood, geographical location, time of day, state of the inner world of the characters. So working with my performers, we take special attention, special time in how we approach these scene changes to make them effortless, organic, and really exciting for the audiences. Finally, marketing the production. As mentioned in articulating the vision, I think marketing the production is crucial, and it should be part of the thinking from the very beginning. An image, a prop, a moment in the thinking for these performers, together in collaboration with our creatives, should make its way throughout the promotional material. These days, we don't rely only on posters, but on variations of posters for social media. And that marketing plan should remain live and able to adapt to current needs, cast and venue changes, as well as market trends. Lighting has been a very an area that I'm extremely interested in everything I do, because light is not only to fully realize the atmosphere, the detail, and the mood, but it's also there to think and infiltrate into the subliminal energy of the production and provide an additional layer of semiotics and meaning. It's a crucial skill, so when I teach directing, I encourage my directors to think about lighting, and we've got, when they have their own examination, to go up there to the lighting box and not only design their own lighting, but also operating during the exams. Lighting can be used in a very musical way, delivering punctuation, counterpoint, juxtaposition, repetition, but also support, enhance, and in a way help deliver the directorial and creative vision. My work can be captured under the term composed theatre. Composed theatre, according to David Rosner, is not a genre, it is more a frame or a lens that brings quite disparate phenomena into view, and at the center of this frame, we've got the creation processes that bring the musical notion of composing to the theatrical aspects of performing and staging. So it's applying musical strategies in the way that we direct. With the term musicalization, what we can see is, on one hand, the actor, and on the other hand, directorial strategies, both of which intending to establish a musicality as a different scenic and aesthetic category, as an element which resists chaos and feeds from other structures like space, bodies, objects, and speech. So, as I mentioned earlier, we could use this in devising rehearsal methods as an organizational principle, but also how we affect the perception by the audience. What musical structures can we use in directing? It could be specific musical phrases, musical forms, musical gestures, musical devices. For example, antiphonical spacing can be really crucial in the way that we direct a piece, musical motifs, musical modulations, and the use of a drone. When we deal with rhythm, We can think of sudden changes, long pauses, repetition, or the use of a looped riff. For Patrice Pavis, the new directory is the aesthete of theatrical forms, the silent musician, the choreographer of silence. So we can see that this journey, these ideas of musicalization and composed theatre are now very much present in the thinking of theatre criticism, and also in the way that a lot of new directors approach their work. One of those is Rebecca Frecknell. In her fascinating Summer and Smoke, she used the presence of 7 upright pianos, which created the scenography for her work. All of the performers engaged and performed and created the soundtrack live from these 7 pianos, but these were used also as part of the world that they inhabited. They became part of the setting and contributed to the set design and scenography of the work. A completely and utterly fascinating piece, encapsulating everything I've been talking about up to now. Sanders talks about adaptation and appropriation and how texts influence each other, and this provides a sense of tension, perhaps for the audience, recognition, and pleasure. Adaptation is distinguished from appropriation by defining the latter as a more decisive journey away from the original text and into a new cultural domain. So this may or may not involve a generic shift, and it may still require the intellectual juxtaposition of at least one text with another. And what we've got here is that this also allows the audience to perceive this as a step further away from adaptation. So we've got adaptation, appropriation, and then we also move to transadaptation, which has a very specific, localized setting. This year, there have been a plethora of Greek tragedy productions. We've got Punch Drunk's richly immersive experience, The Burned City, about Troy. Iphigenia in Splot, which sets the action in Wales, and Medea at Soho Place. In the summer, The Trojan Women, blending Greek tragedy and pansori, an ancient Korean form of musical storytelling, will be presented at Edinburgh Festival 2023. If we just talk briefly about Simon Stone, the enfant terrible of adaptation, his Phaedra stands out and excels because of its ruthless and irreverent adaptation. He mixes up texts from Euripides, Seneca, and Racine, but ultimately it becomes an unforgettable piece of new writing, highlighting the journey of the new post-menopausal protagonist, giving her voice, space, and a platform to explore her inner desire and the associated trauma which comes with any rejection, especially an emotional one. Writing in 2008, Patrice Pavis points out the way in which the dogma of fidelity persists in haunting the theoretical and critical discourse of performance. This is despite the fact that we seem to have arrived at a point where enough space has been made for both textocentrics and scenocentrics in contemporary landscape. And this is exactly the place I found myself in the middle of this debate in 2008, when Ajax traveled from Leeds to the 11th International Festival of Ancient Greek Drama in Cyprus. Of course, things have shifted since then, but at the time the production was deemed controversial because of its removal of choral odes and replacement with verbatim material from the soldiers. On the other hand, after our performance at the Curium Ancient Theatre, we were approached by several military wives who were extremely moved and thanked us for showing to them how it might feel for their husband soldiers to be stationed abroad. That moment was reassuring and confirmed that the work was valuable and had a strong impact. my work broke free from the traditional productions of ancient Greek tragedy and resisted the criticism in order to reach a new audience and new points of connection. I will talk about the range of the work, but I will not be talking about Ion, which was set in an orphanage, and Electra, which was prophetic about the plague. But I will reiterate that all those directorial processes were applied with the same rigor. There is a range of recurring research questions that appear in my work. In what ways the geographical and socio-political setting can affect the creation of narrative in a transadaptation of Greek tragedy that was very present in Orestes, which was set in Ireland. How can we develop secondary characters in order to enhance the dramatic narrative? That was clear in Antigone, where we focused on the sister Ismene, as well as the protagonist Antigone, and Helen of Troy, where we focused on another Helen, which was part of the chorus in that setting. To what extent can the mise-en-scène shape the direction and musicalization of the text? That was evident in Women of Troy and Hippolytus, where the set design really instantly and suddenly responded to all of the changes that happened in the narrative. In what ways is the hero presented on stage after being exposed to moments of excess, whether that's post-traumatic excess, sensuous or personal excess? And that's in Wife of Heracles. We've got somebody who comes back of war in a state which is suffering from post-traumatic disorder. In our version is a footballer which after a lot of excesses is not able to connect with the environment. And finally, how do we empower women in a contemporary adaptation of Greek tragedy in exploring representations which go beyond the traditional norms? In Oedipus, we remade the work Oedipus and Jocasta, focusing on Natalie Haynes, the children of Jocasta, in allowing a very useful and very vibrant voice of Jocasta to be present in the narrative. I would like to talk about specific case studies and walk us through our specific adaptations and how we apply these perspectives in working through these adaptations as part of the directorial process. In Orestes, what we went with is usually Greek tragedies start with a very long 3-4 page monologue, which gives all of the context to the work. For new audiences, that might be a bit difficult to follow, a lot of names, a lot of warriors, a lot of information that needs to be present in those 3-4 pages. So what we do, we remove that opening long monologue and split it up amongst different chorus members to give the background to the tragedy. So in Orestes, we start with the funeral of Clytemnestra. And in this funeral, it's very clear where the setting is, but also the chorus is allowed through their individual and individualized voices to tell us what happened before. Later on, when Orestes is haunted by the Furies, we have him in this place, and there's a huge mixture, melange of reality and his own reality, and we can see the two different worlds functioning at the same time, but in different rhythmic qualities. So here is when musicalization, slowing down the action, or allowing double speed of movement to take place, and allow for this clash of the two worlds to be presented. In Helen of Troy, we gave the chorus an individual voice. So all of the chorus members were part of this circus. The action was moved to Egypt. And what we can see here is that in this world, we've got a world of travelers that have individual voices and individual journeys within this work. In this fantastic set design, which was created by Ian Lindley at the time, the caravan, towards the end of the show, opens up, half of it goes up into the ceiling, and we have that becoming into a boat where Helen is taken back home by her husband Menelaus. In Hippolytus, stage at Leeds was transformed into a boxing ring. So what we had here is a boxing ring where we had respect and discipline, an amateur boxing ring which at the same time worked with the sports and culture that we had at the time, but also it highlighted the violence in the ring and presented suicide on stage. Robin Waterfield states that the ancient boxer, however, supplemented his victories in sports competitions with prize-winning performances as male heroes in tragedies, mostly by Euripides. And that gave us a permission to read the role of Hippolytus. He's here presented by Tom Colley on the floor to be presented as a boxer. At the same time, the boxing ring is transformed into a second-class underground cabaret theatre where Phaedra is the main performer, and we can see that her journey and her emotional distress is captured in these two pictures, and actually she takes her own life on stage during a performance in that theatre. In The Wife of Heracles, I applied an emotional mapping and color analysis with the performers, where they had to really create a graph and map their emotional journey with different colors and different codes so that they know how it changes from scene to scene. Also, I applied working with the understudy. That means we work with more than one cast member to create a role, and that way we get new nuances and we mix up the energies, and that is a moment where we can find new discoveries about the character. On this occasion, we've got Deianira, the wife of Heracles, welcoming one of his new girlfriends, Iole. As you can see, the tension here is extremely evident. And what I used is cyclical structures by changing the ending, but also by transforming the mise-en-scène. The second half is one of the wild parties that Heracles, as a footballer, attended. Here, the swimming pool that was built on stage for us in Stage at Leeds gets transformed into his wet deathbed. In 2013, we had a collaboration with the Michael Gagogiannis Foundation in Athens on a European-funded project called Ancient Greek Drama, Influences and Contemporary Approaches. In that, we presented 3 performances of Antigone, 3 workshops which were attended by 50 acting students or young professionals, and 3 lectures which were attended by around 90 members of the public on our approach to Greek tragedy. On that occasion, we located the specific geographical context. The work was set on the London 2011 riots. So, for a British audience that had a very clear moment of connection, a very clear moment of identification, but even in Greece, because of the news, they were able to link and reread that work very clearly in its new framework. Another principle that I apply in my work is about bringing the bodies on stage, bringing the dead bodies on stage. So the off-stage deaths become an event which takes place on stage. In our voyeuristic society, we are competing with TV, media, and documentaries, and this action actually reminds us how urgent, how dramatic, and how unnecessary these deaths are. Usually these are described by the messenger of stage in elaborate long monologues. In my work, all of these deaths are presented on stage. Antigone was set in a looted wedding shop, and her doomed wedding with Haemon was actually shown on stage. And for the last 15 minutes, we replaced the text with music and movement. So the last 15 minutes of Antigone took place in silence. Directors like Mataller use these extreme tempos of retardation or acceleration or explicit rhythmicality into their work that allows for a deeper narrative or character motivation, or justification. On this occasion, our Tiresias spoke, moved, and performed in a completely different rhythm than everybody else, a much more slowed down rhythm, and that had a very strong impact on the narrative. At the ending, we added an alternative ending. So as you can see, this fantastic chandelier descends and imprisons Creon, who lost his wife Eurydice, his son Haemon, and remains with Ismene. In the future, he marries Ismene. So at the end of Antigone, we descend this chandelier to become a new prison on this new wedding cake with Creon and Ismene. So we've got a new ending which helps us understand the next part of the myth. Women of Troy was very much influenced by the immigrant crisis. It was set in a Greek island. Here we had the moment of transformation where stage at Leeds became a warehouse and allowed us to explore that crisis in a very detailed way, but also a way that allowed us to share real immigrant stories within the narrative. A very popular Greek tragedy during the recent pandemic was Oedipus the King, because it really talked about the virus and about the city and how we were able to be resilient after that. In our version of Oedipus and Jocasta, just a year before the pandemic, we gave voice to Jocasta. We also used projections to enhance the scenography and allow for instant scene changes. So we have a swimming pool. As you might find out very soon, swimming pools is very much part of my theatrical language and palette. But here we had a swimming pool, an empty swimming pool, but also we had the theme of a drought. So the lack of water allowed that space to be the desert and a very barren space. On this occasion, in the very uncomfortable moment where Oedipus shares a bed with his own mother Jocasta, we have projections of embryos just to remind us and reconnect with what actually this moment represents and how uncomfortable this moment actually is for anybody watching this material. The initial idea was a pool, an empty pool, that was later on filled with blood. The way that we were able to materialize this is by filling the stage with blood.
Stanley died on the operating theatre from a heart attack during surgery for cancer. I had to go to the burial. Stanley and my dad had not talked for about a year. And that morning my dad looked tired. It was early. He wore a shirt. Drunk Johnny Walker. Smelled of Old Spice. And we went to the car behind the hearse, and my uncles were there, my Aunt Shirley, and all my cousins. And no one really spoke. It was just so quiet. We drove into the cemetery, got out. The uncles and my dad carried Stanley's box to a hole in the ground. And the vicar said some words about God and resurrection. lowered Stanley's box into the ground. And suddenly my dad started to cry, calling out, "Dad! Dad! Dad!" Waving his arms about, trying to get into the hole with Stanley's box. And my uncles and aunt were clearly embarrassed and walked away, laughing. And I just stood there, watching my father cry for his own father. And I didn't know what to say or do. So I just watched and waited.
Was The Burial by Andrew Mills, from the monologue For Better, For Worse that I directed in December 2022, featuring Malcolm Webb. In the second and final part of my presentation, I will talk about the use of verbatim in my work and the creation of new musical theatre. In the musical Diffraction, we explored with students the lives of Lord William Bragg and his son Lawrence and their work on crystallography. With my colleague Tony Gardner and students, we explored electrification of the country house in Electrified, together with Professor Graham Goody. We explored the lives of female engineers in She and the lives of female pilots in Under Her Wing. I also worked with Adam Strickson on Triathlon, a dance theatre piece for a University of Leeds Cultural Olympiad event and the Nobody Festival, Dance Theatre Festival in Cyprus, incorporating interviews with real triathletes. In 2012, I was invited to write a pitch for a new verbatim musical for Paphos, Capital of Culture. This work will be based on the views of Cyprus residents and beyond on Aphrodite and beauty. That's the name, The Truth About Beauty, the truth about Venus. As you can guess, the work was based in, outside and around a swimming pool, and it was funded by the European Union as part of the Final Bid proposal. The influences was London Road, a significant musical which uses vocal utterances as part of the musical score, and Rimini Protocol's Prometheus in Athens. The piece addressed the question, how might found material impact the development of the musical dramaturgy in site-specific production, and it was a collaboration between myself and composer Dr. Dimitris Zaporos. The dissemination involved a verbatim musical, which we had the material, it was musicalized as a deliberate act of mediation, highlighting the self-referential musical treatment and the constructive nature of experience, avoiding any attempt of a faithful representation of reality. Authenticity and hyperrealism were replaced with post-traumatic aesthetics of making space for a diversity of voices and postmodern representations of fact and fiction. Finally, the project created new insights in dealing with the reality representation binaries in the poetic transfiguration editing of the musical theatrical composition of found material, the creative collaborative frictions in composing an intermediate hybrid music theatre piece using found materials, and the way the composed material reverberates with the site specific reality of the adopted space with its own performative and sociocultural layers and ethical boundaries. London Road, as I said earlier, is a revolution for musical theatre because it's made completely by using speech patterns, intonations to provide for the vocal lines for the new verbatim work, where lyrics, pitch and rhythm are constructed entirely from everyday spoken utterances. So this work has really shaped our approach and work in thinking about it, and I believe it's a revolution in musical theatre. And it makes perfect sense also for Disney to reimagine and retool classical tales for their work in order to redefine audience expectations about gender and challenge some of preconceptions in relation to semiotics and visual readings when it comes to educating a younger audience. So the musical is moving into a new direction now with new approaches, a new understanding and repurposing of the classical tales. Dementia 2012 was a commission between the Cyprus delegation to UNESCO and the Cyprus Ministry of Culture in a collaboration with Alex Panagis, Stelios Mavridis, and it was a musical journey into creativity, treachery and eternity. It was presented in Paris in the Salle de l'UNESCO, but it explored the relationship between music and dementia and the impact of that relationship, the integration of real stories in the dramaturgy of a new narrative, and the dialogue between the community of families and dementia patients. The third musical I would like to present is Body Faded Blue, a 2-month consultancy residency at the State Theatre of Cyprus. In this work, we dealt with male infertility and explored the journey of a young female dentist who wants to have a child at all costs. The research interests I worked with the actors there was about devising new music theatre work, exploring the relationship of music and text, actioning the text and movement, and refining improvisation as a compositional technique. It was about using IVF, and it was unbelievable and extremely moving that at the time when we were talking to friends and family about the work, how many people came and shared their own IVF stories and difficulties, successes in working with IVF, and it just reminded us how crucial this aspect of life is for couples dealing with infertility. In this work, we had a very much Leeds presence. Dimitri Zavros, PhD in music theatre at the School of PCI, was a composer. It was choreographed by a Leeds graduate from PCI, Lucy Loader, and was written by Stelios Mavridis, but the design was by Leeds-based designer Barney George. The lighting was by George Lazarou. As you can see, a lot of Georges in this production. It opened on the 3rd of November 2010, and it received very positive notices from the national press. It talked about the relationships, the love triangle, but also the power of presenting the human body on stage, and how that fascination was shared with the audience. It also received the Best Director Award for the season 2009 to 2011, celebrating the freshness, spontaneity, and fun, but also how it moved effortlessly from the serious to the comic, from laughter to reflection. The Fall of Icarus was a project where we reversed the process. I worked with my collaborator, the dramaturg Duška Radosavljević, and it was part of the Fall of the Berlin Wall anniversary, commissioned by Jorga Solomondos. So what we have here is we worked the other way round. The dramaturg asked me for 5 images before we started the process. So I provided these 5 images of 3 young men landing an aeroplane, a woman giving a toy aeroplane to a young boy at Christmas, a stewardess and a young man having an affair in a hotel room, a woman being lifted by 3 young men mirroring Kerber drapers painting the Lament of Icarus, and 3 young men on the airport runaway smoking. Dushka was then able to create a fantastic new musical based on these 5 images, reversing the process, but also allowing us for a moment to celebrate the Berlin Wall using some authentic material from one of the pilots who tried unsuccessfully to cross from one side to the other. More recently, my work has moved to further adaptations in the areas of using verbatim in the VR, in the piece Sticklebacks with the Technological University of Cyprus. We are using another text by Andrew Mills to explore that verbatim world within virtual reality, but also it has moved into a film adaptation of the 1915 play Queenies in collaboration with Dr. Mark Westgarth, and it's followed by a new musical based on the life of the antique dealer Joseph Davine. In closing, in Euripides the Bacchae, Pentheus is regarded as one of the first voyeurs on the theatrical stage. When the god Dionysus offers him the opportunity to observe hidden the orgiastic activities of the Bacchantes in the mountains, Pentheus accepts, even if he has to deny his masculinity and dress up as a woman in order to blend in and remain unnoticed. Pentheus' desire to watch the women in the mountains dancing and singing in ecstasy does not bode well for him, as in the end he's killed and decapitated by his own mother. His guiltless visual pleasure is punished with extreme death. And I ask, thousands of years have passed since the premiere of the Bacchae, and our spectatorial habits have been developed since then. Are there any positive aspects to our viewing in the theatron that will allow us to get a better understanding of our world, identify our role within it, and help us manage our actions, our dreams, passions, and traumas in a more affirmative way? Thank you very much.